Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace, coming at you. It is Thursday, June 15th, a couple days after the conclusion of the 2023 NBA Finals, to which, of course, we saw the Denver Nuggets hoist the trophy for the first time ever. First and foremost, congratulations to the Nuggets. This was an awesome season, man. I'm kind of emotional right now at the end of my first season, doing this podcast and really being locked into the NBA more than I've ever been before. So it was a lot of fun. I think we have a very deserving champion, which we'll talk more about. Of course, since the last time that we spoke, we've had two NBA Finals games that we are going to recap today. Shouldn't be a long podcast, so let's get right into it, man. Game 4 was, I think, the most important game of the entire series. Now, if you look at the box score, it wasn't particularly close. It wasn't particularly entertaining. But we'll talk a little bit more about why. Denver ends up winning this game, of course, 108-95. Wasn't particularly close down the stretch, but it was a massive game for the Nuggets because this was a game in which they survived some really tough foul trouble by Jokic, and they survived the non-Jokic minutes in a really big way in the fourth quarter. Jokic picked up his fourth and fifth fouls basically back-to-back with about 9 minutes and 24 seconds left in the fourth quarter of this one. One of them was an offensive foul that was pretty tough. And the game was actually 86-76 in Denver's favor. Mike Malone, coach of the Denver Nuggets, did not end up putting back Jokic into the game until there was 4:09 left. And when he eventually did put him in the game, there was only a 1-point difference in the league. The lead dropped from a 10-point lead to the Nuggets to a 9-point lead for the Nuggets. So the fact that they were able to survive for, over 5 minutes in the fourth quarter, to which obviously Miami was pulling out all the stops. They had their best, what they believed to be their best lineup in the game for the entirety of that period. Obviously Bam and Jimmy being on the court for that time period, and they really weren't able to capitalize. And reason being, it wasn't due to some crazy performance by Jamal Murray. I know he had a massive three in between that time that Jokic was on the bench, but really it was fueled by the efforts of Aaron Gordon and Bruce Brown as well. This was a game that was really telling because Gordon and Brown actually combined for 48 points on 73% shooting from the field, which was pretty incredible, while Jokic and Murray combined for just 38 points, so 10 less points on 36% shooting. And while that's pretty shocking within itself, it's even more shocking when you consider that the story and the book on this Denver team all year was how are they going to survive non-Jokic minutes? Now, obviously, when you get into the playoffs and rotations, shorten up a little bit and coaches have the freedom and the flexibility to play their best players for longer stretches. There's no more back-to-back games. Obviously, every game is massively important, so they're going to have Jokic on the court for a longer amount of time. But that being said, for them to, be in game 4 of the NBA Finals and not have their guy for nearly 5 minutes, some said that was a questionable decision by Mike Malone. Even with 5 fouls, they'd like to see Jokic out there. And obviously, if he ends up picking up his 6th foul, you just have to adjust at that point instead of just kind of keeping him on the bench as more of a precaution. But either way, this was a team that wasn't able to survive these minutes all year. And again, it wasn't due to a crazy hot shooting performance from Jamal Murray. No, Gordon was unbelievable in this game. So was Bruce Brown. Unbelievably efficient from these guys, both shooting, basically over 70% from the field. And it ended up winning them a game in a major way and putting them in a huge spot to go back to Denver for game 5 and have an opportunity to close out the series. So moving on to game 5, I think that this one was far and away the most entertaining game of the series. I'm sure a lot of people might disagree just because it was pretty low scoring. Denver ended up winning this game 94-89. It was an absolute rock fight, man. It felt kind of like a game 7. I don't know, maybe I'm just, gassing it a little bit right now, but I don't know. It just, with how tight everybody was from the gate, I think Denver started off the game with like 3 turnovers or something like that. So you could tell that these guys were nervous. They did not want to see this game go back to Miami for game 6. The crowd was obviously super electric for that, having the opportunity to win it all in front of your home floor. Mike Breen just in his bag. Like, I love, this is a random Mike Breen tangent. I just love Mike Breen so much. He's easily the best in the business. And in this game in particular, he was just perfect. I watched it back today just to kind of remember everything that happened. And my biggest takeaway was just like, damn, Mike Breen was so entertaining to listen to during this game. So it felt like a game 7. Obviously, both sides, we're going to go all out. And Miami certainly did not roll over in this one. They as it was the case all series, nothing came easy for Denver, but they were able to, find a way to win this game in the end, of course. The big story of the game is in the fourth quarter when things were tight. Miami had a pretty big run to put themselves back into the game and give themselves a lead, and it was almost entirely from Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler ended up scoring the last 13 points of the game for the Heat, which was pretty heroic. It was a stretch where, it was kind of the Jimmy game we were kind of waiting for the entirety of the finals, and it felt like we were finally going to get it. But unfortunately for Jimmy, man, the last couple plays for him really didn't go his way after, obviously heroically scoring 13 consecutive points for his team. He looked really exhausted, and I'm sure most of you guys remember watching this live. That one play in particular with, less than a minute left, he has Jamal Murray in an isolation situation. He gets to his spot in the middle of the lane, picks up his dribble. I felt like it was, going to be a classic, Jimmy kind of lowers his shoulder, maybe gives an up fake, something like that. He just looked really tired and kind of panicked out there, ends up pivoting around and throwing a terrible pass that got picked off by KCP, which was obviously a crucial turnover. KCP gets fouled, goes to the free throw line, makes both free throws. And then after that, on the subsequent possession, Jimmy Butler, the Heat are down 3 in this situation. It looks like the initial play was to get Duncan Robinson a look. He wasn't open. The ball finds its way back in the hands of Jimmy Butler. Hoists up a terrible 3 that hits the backboard first, and then that's basically ball game. So, overarching thoughts on Jimmy, and we'll talk more about him in a sec, is, I just felt bad for the guy. Was such a competitor this entire run, obviously the best player on this Miami team that was pretty devoid of talent and basically had a talent disadvantage, and I would say at least 3 out of the 4 series that they played in. So it was really tough that, people are going to remember the turnover. They're going to remember the brick 3, I'm sure. But hopefully they remember the 13 straight points that he scored for his team to close out that game as well before that. And again, just kind of like what the case was in game 4. I know, again, Jokic was really special in this game too. He was the only dude in this game that shot above 50%. He shot like 75% from the field. I think he was 12 of 16 shooting. He was incredible, but it was still really cool at the end of the game. It was 89-90. Miami was actually up, and the last 6 points of the game were scored by Bruce Brown and KCP. Bruce Brown had a crazy, right place, right time tip in to give Denver a 1-point lead to put them up 91-90. And then after that, KCP had 2 clutch free throws. And then after Jimmy's missed 3, Bruce Brown had the final dagger, knocking down both shots at the line. So those are 4 really tough free throws from guys that are not normally in the situation to take those, right? You would like to see the ball in Jamal Murray's hands, I'd imagine. But KCP and Bruce Brown were able to close them out, and they were able to win with another really strong performance from Denver's role players. So, that being said, it was a really awesome series. It was really special to watch Denver hoist the trophy, which we'll talk about in a sec. But before we get into, this outlook and my commentary from the Denver perspective, I, just wanted to talk about Miami one last time here. What a run it was for them, right? This was a really special run for Miami. And the big difference for them, just looking at where they were at in the Eastern Conference Finals to where they were at in the NBA Finals, it's pretty obvious that it comes down to the production from the Miami role players above all else. I know Denver is a more talented team than the Celtics. I think that's pretty safe to say at this point in time. But, Caleb Martin going from 19 points a game against the Celtics to 7 points a game. Gabe Vincent going from 16 points a game in the Eastern Conference Finals to 11 points a game. Even guys like Duncan Robinson and Max Strus going from 11 and 9 points per game, respectively, to 8 and 6 points, respectively, in the finals compared to where they were at the Eastern Conference Finals. That's tough to overcome. That's really tough to overcome. I know Jimmy's scoring dropped off a little bit in the finals as well. I think Bam's actually went up quite a bit since he had some big offensive games. But that's really tough to overcome for a team that is, again, pretty devoid of all-star talent. I think what those stats and the drop-off from the Eastern Conference Finals to the finals, what that really highlighted was, look, it did kind of feel like some of the pixie dust that Miami was running on in that Celtics series. It kind of lost its luster, kind of went away. They were kind of running on fumes at that point. But, it's just a lot to ask of a team to go into Denver, play in a really difficult spot to play where Denver was amazing at home all season long. For them to go in there and at least steal one of those games and still make it competitive 3 out of the 5 games. I'm really impressed with Miami. I think Coach Spo pulled all the strings that he really could have in a series like that. Obviously, there's no obvious adjustments to what they could do differently. They did keep Murray in check the last couple games of the series as well, which is worth noting. Jokic is the best player in the world and is, truly unstoppable at this point in time. So, you're really just picking your poison with how you want to defend him because he's going to find a way to dissect it and exploit your weakness no matter what type of coverage you use to throw at him. And I just think it's, one last talk about Jimmy Butler here. I think this guy, he's going to be always really difficult to rank, especially it's, where you would want to rank him as far as the top players in the league. It really comes down to what time of year you're asking that question because, in the regular season, you'd be crazy to even say he's, a top 20 guy for the most part. And then, when it comes to the postseason where it really matters the most, that's a different conversation. I feel like Jimmy has solidified himself as a top 10 player in the NBA because of what he has done in the postseason 3 out of the last 4 years. Making it to, of course, the finals in the bubble, 4 years ago now, making it to the Eastern Conference Finals, or 3 years ago now, I should say, making it to the Eastern Conference Finals last year and being one shot away from going to the finals just 1 year ago, and then what he did this year. This is what matters the most, man. He's, again, when RJ and I were doing that draft a couple weeks back and discussing, playoff players you'd want to have in your team, I think I picked him about, 6 in that draft. Again, we were only selecting out of players in round 2, so it's a little different. But either way, I stand by that pick. I think everything we know about Jimmy Butler has been solidified because, you can't just point to the bubble and say that was a fluky run. You can't just point to that Miami team last year and say, well, hey, they were the 1 seed. We kind of expected them to be at that point. Even when the odds are stacked against them, Jimmy's a really special guy. Obviously, the shooting wasn't quite there and it came back down to earth and was more in the ballpark of what we'd see from regular season Jimmy. He certainly wasn't as good as what he was in the Milwaukee series, but he's an absolute competitor. He's a guy anybody would want in your team. He's a two-way player. And I do think while he had a really special postseason, I wanted to kind of ask the question to you guys. Do you think he's the biggest winner from the postseason, right? Or the biggest riser in terms of where you thought of a player before the postseason to where they are now? I think the 3 names that come to mind are, of course, Jimmy, as we just talked about. I think it has to be Jokic. I think he only really jumped up 1 spot for me, going from what I would probably have put him as the second best player in the world before the playoffs to he's definitely wearing that belt, that title right about now. I think he surpassed Giannis for me with winning this title. Certainly hard to argue against him. Even though he only moved up 1 spot, that's still the 1 spot that matters the most, right? And I think the other name that comes to mind, I know he's been out for a couple rounds now, is Devin Booker. He's a guy that I never really took super serious as like a top 10 player in the league before the playoffs, but the stuff he did during the first 2 rounds of the playoffs were so incredible. And they were the only team to even beat Denver more than once in this entire postseason run. And it was because he literally played perfect basketball in those 2 games and obviously got a lot of help from Kevin Durant in those wins as well. But I do think that despite the fact that Jimmy had solidified himself as a top 10 player in the league, I think he's, probably floating around that 9-10 spot. I think he's right on the bubble. During the regular season, you'd probably drop him down to again, outside the top 20. But at the end of the day, I think we all know where Jimmy stands. Despite that, I think Booker was actually the biggest riser during this entire playoff picture. And then, of course, we have to talk about the Nuggets, right? Obviously, again, congratulations to the Denver Nuggets and their fan base. It's been a long time coming. This is the first time the team had even made it to the finals, let alone win a championship. So this is obviously a very special time for them. I just wanted to give my 2 cents on the who did they beat argument, because that's something that seems to come up virtually every year, right? Okay, who did they beat? People talked about it, with the Chiefs during the Super Bowl for no reason. It's pretty funny, and it's always going to be a bad argument if you're talking about a team that just won a title, and then you have to ask, well, who did they beat? As your counter argument to sort of devalue that title. It's always been bad, but I think in this case, it's especially bad. Now, I know when you look at the argument on paper, it says they beat an 8 seed in Minnesota, they beat a 4 seed in Phoenix, they beat a 7 seed in the Lakers, and then they beat another 8 seed in the NBA Finals with the Miami Heat. But if you actually watched any of the games, you know that this doesn't tell the full story, not even close. I would say with conviction, they beat, obviously outside of themselves, the other 2 best teams in the Western Conference. How quickly we forget that they were literally not favored in the series against Phoenix in round 2. I believe the Vegas favorite in that at the start of that series was that Phoenix was going to come out on top. They were favored to win that series, and Denver overcame that. It's because Phoenix is obviously loaded with star power. Now, I know they came up short with a couple injuries, but I probably could have told you that anyway, right? That's the biggest beef everyone has with Phoenix is that nobody believes they can really stay healthy. So the fact that they beat, again, what I think the 2 best teams in the Western Conference besides themselves, I probably would have said Golden State before the playoffs, but the Lakers beat them pretty handily, so I think the Lakers solidified themselves as the 3rd most talented team in the Western Conference, and they ran through them in 4 games. That's really impressive, man. The Wolves were kind of a rollover in round 1, but they earned that being the 1 seed in the West, I'll admit that. And then you get to the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference Finals and be like, yeah, they beat Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, and they beat an 8th seed in the finals. Well, that's the same 8th seed that beat, with conviction, the two best teams in basketball during the regular season. They obviously ran through Milwaukee in round one. They ran through, the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. Those teams had the two best records in basketball. They were the two teams that I thought with conviction that were, the title was going to go through a matchup of the Celtics and the Bucks in the Eastern Conference Finals, and that, of course, was not the case. So, again, it's a shitty argument no matter what, but to say that, the Denver Nuggets didn't beat anybody on their road to a championship, that's just a classic late June NBA headline and somebody looking to fill a segment on a radio show or something like that, because that could not be farther from the truth. Again, I talked about it before. I think Game 4 might not have been the most entertaining game, but it was the most important game of the series. It was pretty poetic for Denver to come out and find a way to win without Jokic and survive the non-Jokic minutes in a massive way. I felt like at that moment in time, if it wasn't obvious enough already, they earned it, right? They answered questions about winning on the road. They answered questions about their depth. They answered questions about what type of team are they without Jokic on the court. And they did it in a really, major way by, having to be without Jokic for 5 consecutive minutes in the fourth quarter of an NBA Finals game and finding a way to win that one. That was awesome. It was also awesome to see a guy like Michael Porter Jr., who, pretty openly struggled shooting the ball the entirety of the finals. I think he was well below 20% shooting from three, which, that was kind of the book on him before the series. It's like, hey, he's like a 6'10 Klay Thompson, right? I've heard that thrown around here and there, and he couldn't shoot for shit. And he still couldn't shoot in Game 5, but he found a way to make some really big plays. He came up with 16 points, 13 rebounds, and 3 assists, despite the fact that, again, he still shot 1 of 6 from 3 in this game. And 16 and 13 in a game like Game 5, where, his team ended up with 94 points and it was an absolute rock fight. That was really massive for him. He had some incredible highlights too, a great take to the basket. He had some big boards that, he quickly passed the ball up the court for important outlet passes. MPJ was awesome, and I think he is actually a big piece of this team moving forward, because I think an overarching thought on the Nuggets are that, they can actually get better too. That's kind of the scary thing, right? Like, you look at their roster heading into next season, and really the only obvious candidate for someone who should be on another team next year is probably Bruce Brown. I mean, I think he was on a 1-year deal, and that dude's going to get paid, man. Like, with how big he was in Game 4, scoring 4 of the last 6 points for the Nuggets in Game 6 as well. He was incredible for them as like a backup point guard for the majority of the season. And playing a totally different role than what he did for the Nets. I mean, he was basically like a undersized power forward for the Nets last year. So Bruce Brown's going to get paid, and he's probably out of there. But you look at the rest of their, the 7 of their other 8-man rotation in the playoffs, they're all going to be back, it is presumed, right? And I think that there's actually room for Michael Porter Jr. to get better. Again, he wasn't great in the finals shooting the ball. He wasn't, really he didn't really have a good game until Game 5 anyways. So if he, kind of reaches another level of his game where, he really is a two-way threat, obviously his rebounding is already on the level where you'd want it to be. And usually his shooting is as well. But if he could become more of a creative scorer in the mid-range and attacking the basket, and then, still improve a little bit more on defense, I know he's already come a long way in that department, and becomes truly a third star on that team, they're going to be virtually impossible, to stop. So yeah, man, I think that this Nuggets team is legit. I think that they really did check every box. I think that's the best way to say it, right? Again, everything that they overcame, winning on the road, still defending their home court, finding a way to win without Jokic, winning with a massive Jokic game, winning a game in which both Jokic and Murray put up 30-point triple doubles, winning a game where they both those guys struggled shooting in the field and the role players had to stay up, or step up, I should say. It was really special. They're well deserving of this title. And, I think the last thing that I wanted to comment on here was, after the game, right? I'm a nerd about this stuff, right? I think a lot of us, can become pretty nerdy in that sense, where I can't be the only one out there that really likes watching, immediately after, a team wins the title, really in any sport, right? Like watching, the camera find different players and, people on the winning team, people on the losing team, the coaching staff, the fans, how special it is of a moment. I was so sad watching Jokic after winning. Like, One thing that I've always been pretty firm on, like I know the narrative around Jokic was like, oh, he just doesn't care. Like he doesn't care if he gets MVP. He doesn't care how many points he gets, how many rebounds he has. He just cares about winning games and this and that, right? Like, and I was like, sure, like I get it. I'm not saying the guy doesn't care, but just because he's foreign and not on Twitter, we're just supposed to assume he doesn't have an opinion about anything and he doesn't love the game of basketball. I never bought into that shit. I was always like, that is so overplayed. Like I'm never gonna talk about that. But then I watched him after they won the title, right? And obviously, the first thing he did after they won is he shook hands with like literally everybody on the Heat. Like he's dapping up Haslam, he's dapping up Haywood Highsmith, who barely got any minutes, right? He shook everybody's hand, which was like that shit was super cool, right? But like after, he just looked like so like he just looked kind of like relieved, I guess. Like it wasn't like ecstatic, it wasn't emotional. It wasn't this moving like lifelong dream situation. Like you had guys like Jamal Murray who overcame a massive injury and was like crying, and it was exactly what you would expect him to see in a situation like that. And Jokic just did not give a shit, man. And then of course the clip that went viral where like somebody asked him about how if he's looking forward to the parade, which was earlier today actually, and he's like, no, I have to go home. Like like what do you mean you have to go home? Like enjoy this. Like be with the people that you just went on this 9-month journey with. You played, what, like 100 games of basketball in the past 7 months. Like, this is an incredible achievement. Like, even if you personally don't value it as much as others, like just for the joy that your teammates feel, right? In situations like that, and the coaches and what this means to them. Like, it was actually pretty depressing to watch Jokic win the title. But I will say that today, again, on Thursday, June 15th, there was a clip of him pretty hammered at the parade. So he did stay for the parade. He didn't go home back to Serbia. He stayed and he thanked the fans. And he's like, I know I didn't want to stay for this, but this is awesome. I never want to leave the parade. It was a great like 30-second little speech he had to the crowd. So he kind of made up for it in that book, but I did want to mention that it was really, really depressing to watch that guy win an NBA title, and there probably is some merit to how little that guy gives a shit about basketball. He is definitely there to collect a paycheck, to feed his family, and he just happens to be really, really good at a game that he very much treats as a job. So that guy's a cyborg or something, man. I can't believe how good he is. Not to say he's not passionate about it. He clearly has enough, the work ethic and what it takes to win, but yeah, man, it's pretty shocking to see somebody reach the peak of their craft and still have that it's my day job mentality, right? You don't often see those two things together, but maybe Jokic is just that good. I think that just about does it for me, man. I feel like most of the NBA storylines right now, like we're kind of in peak filler season. Like, I guess not peak filler season, but it's definitely a weird time if the NBA Finals doesn't end up going like 7 games, because we have this full week before the NFL draft or it's the NBA draft, excuse me. So I know there's a lot of draft preview stuff, but and I don't really want to get into that because frankly I haven't been watching college basketball. I've been pretty wrapped up in everyday life, and then trying to watch as much NBA on top of that. So I don't know much about some of the prospects coming in outside of the top 3 guys in this draft. So it would be a waste of my time and your time for me to rattle off my thoughts on a 10-minute YouTube highlight clip of the Thompson twins and shit like that. Like I'm not gonna waste my time in pretending I know stuff about that. So if you're not a draft analyst guy, all the storylines are speculation, right? Like we still don't have an update on the Chris Paul situation that we talked about last episode. I guess he hasn't been released yet, so I don't really know where that report from Shams came from. I guess he hasn't walked it back yet. Maybe he has. I don't know. But as far as I know, Chris Paul is still a member of the Phoenix Suns, as he should be until at least July 1st, right? And then we have speculation that I guess Beal and the Wizards are working on a trade. That kind of bores me. It's like I know he's been wrapped up in some Celtics talks. I absolutely do not want Bradley Beal on my team. I do not. I guess I can't say that. In a vacuum, I'd like him. I don't want his contract. I certainly don't want to move Jaylen Brown for him. That would be utterly ridiculous and just put us in a worse spot for next year. So I just don't really think Bradley Beal attached to that contract is going to be a needle mover. He would have to be a part of a really special team that's already really poised to win a championship, for Beal to be the straw that gets him over the hump, right? And it ends up getting them a title. So I don't really see him ever being a needle mover. There's always the annual speculation with Dame and Portland that doesn't really seem to be moving in any direction. Maybe that'll work itself out after the draft. But right now it's just a lot of speculation. So a lot of stuff that, beyond what I just covered isn't really worth talking about. So with that, we are a week away from the NBA draft. I will be, most likely I will, kind of dive into some draft prep and give my initial thoughts, but most likely I'll just, probably do an episode the Friday after, the Saturday after the draft, once everything is shaken out, and give my reaction. Even if I don't know everything there is to know about these prospects, it's still interesting to evaluate who won and lost the draft based on some of the trades that were made, based on, some of the team needs and how they were able to address that, based on, some of the perceived value that they gave and picks that they acquired. Like, if a team, whether you like a guy or not, if you have a guy that everybody else has on, ranked as their 30th best player and a GM takes him at 6, that's still a loss, because, you have to be able to find a way to move your capital around to not overpay drastically for a guy like that unless he immediately becomes an all-star level player upon drafting him. But either way, that's still a loss on draft night. So I can always evaluate winners and losers of the draft. And then this following week, we will have NBA free agency, which will be very exciting. And that will be a really great time where after that, maybe I can kind of redo the tier ranking after the draft and after free agency. And we can go through every team and kind of see where we're at on, contenders, pretenders, the tankers, whatever you want to call it, one piece away teams. I think that'll be a fun time to evaluate that and see how I do come this time next year. But yeah, I think beyond that, I'll just be, once I'm done covering those events, we'll try to get some voices from around the NBA, try to get some beat reporters on here and see if we can chop it up and get some inside scoops on some teams that are pretty interesting this offseason, and see if I can sell some people on jumping on the pod. Maybe we can bring RJ back to talk Celtics. Maybe we can get creative with some episodes to, tier rank some players, or, ranking the top 10, players in the NBA by position, and go through a couple episodes that way. But I say all that to say I'm not going anywhere this offseason. The episodes will probably get a little shorter, but I'll still be trying to get you a Words with Wallace episode once a week moving forward. So with that, guys, I'm going to hit this button and get up out of here, and I will talk to you most likely after the draft. Peace.